And good morning, I'm Chief Meteorologist Al Conklin with another version of the First Alert, another episode here. And we're going to cover the tropics because now that we have closed the books on July and are now heading deep into August here, today being August 1st, yeah, we're going to start to see the tropics heat up. Now, it's already been kind of busy. We've already had 3 named storms. And we've got a little something that's out there that's brewing now and that could actually have a little bit of an impact on our weather down the road. So I'm going to take a look at that in detail. And we're going to cover what we can sort of expect for this time of the year, for the month of August, what we normally envision. So let's get to it then. This morning, again, things are still fairly quiet right now. We're looking at, again, basically just a little wave of low pressure, if you will, that's out there. But let's give you that update on what we're seeing out there right now. And again, this morning, the tropical update will feature a couple of things. First off, here we are right there at the beginning of the month. And with that, we're now coming into the peak of hurricane season. Now, technically, it really doesn't kick into high gear until we get up until about the 20th of August. That's when we sort of always have historically, I always say, ring the bell, meaning we're about to enter the zone of the most, frequent updates and frequent activity that typically comes right there at about the 20th of August and runs through the month of September into early in October. And so right now, again, it's been pretty quiet over the last couple of weeks, but things are starting to change a little bit. We've got a couple of things that we want to bring to your attention. Number one is that later on today, we're actually going to get an update from the National Hurricane Center and NOAA on their forecast, which is pretty typical. Usually they try to, give you a little bit of an update mid-season, if you will. Now we're starting to get into the heart of the season. Earlier, though, they had forecast 17 to 25 named storms. The average is 14. So even on the low end of that scale, we were already above average. We've already had 3 named storms. So the next one that comes up would be Debbie, D-E-B-B-Y, Debbie. And 8 to 13 hurricanes. Well, again, average over the last 30 years is 7. So that's above normal. And major hurricanes, we've already had one of those. Beryl was a Category 5 at one point. We're looking at 4 to 7 major hurricanes, and the average over the last 30 years is 3. So again, we will get an update on this coming up. I don't really expect that this is going to appreciably change very much. All of the model data sort of suggests that, again, we're going to be looking at an elevated risk for activity. A couple of things, though. Why has it been so quiet lately is because of so much Saharan dust. The dust has really kind of put the kibosh on a lot of these storms. What that does is dust that comes off of the Saharan desert and moves westward with the trade winds sort of interacts with that tropical zone with all the moisture that comes across from the Pacific and the Caribbean and the Atlantic, and that knocks the stuffing, if you will. It disrupts the formation a lot of times of these storms, and so it is something to consider. And I think we're actually starting to see that it has a pretty profound impact because the sea surface temperatures are actually very, very warm. And so it takes a little more than just sea surface temperatures. So you've got to have things fall in line. So let's start to look a little bit about where these storms form and what we can expect during the month of August. Again, climatology tells us the Gulf of Mexico is usually a hotbed for activity. It is like a big bath out there right now. Steaming, cauldron bath water is what that Gulf of Mexico is. And this is typically where you're going to see a lot of storms develop. The Bay of Campeche off the coast of Florida. And where do they go? They go northward towards the coast, meaning usually into Texas or perhaps Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, up into Florida Panhandle. That is a hotbed of area that we oftentimes will see. Another spot that we typically watch is that western sections of the Caribbean. So just off of Belize, off of El Salvador, off of Cancun and Cozumel, south of Cuba. That's always been a sort of a hotbed this time of the year for development. And a lot of times we'll see these go up either across the Yucatan Peninsula or up into the Gulf of Mexico, between Mexico and Cuba, and drift into the Gulf. And then from there, it's anybody's guess. But a lot of times these things, once they get into the Gulf of Mexico, it's very difficult for them to get out without hitting land. It's either going to be Mexico or it's going to be the United States. Very often. You very rarely see a storm get into the Gulf of Mexico and not impact land. So that's always an area of concern. And then lastly is the Cape Verde storms. And the Cape Verde storms, those are usually the biggies. these are the ones that develop off of Africa, and the Cape Verde Islands are off of Africa. You see them there on the edge of your screen. And these will drift all the way across the Atlantic in the trade winds and then start to turn, usually towards the west-northwest. And again, if we can get some of these to go off of Florida and up into the Carolinas, that's when we start to get impacted. But this is always a concern because this is usually where your big storms are going to develop. Historically, the Hugo-type storms, the Andrew-type storms, they come from this direction, and this is where they typically wind up going. They can go into the Caribbean and eventually the Gulf of Mexico. They can go up the east coast of the United States, or sometimes, if we're fortunate, and this happens oftentimes actually, when the Bermuda High is farther offshore, they actually recurve and stay out to sea. That's always the best. But again, you always got to be concerned when you see anything that develops out here because they've got a lot of real estate, a lot of warm water to traverse over as they move west-northwestward, and it always gives them plenty of time for development here. So a lot of times you start to see your major hurricanes come from this area. So those are the Cape Verde storms. So that's the areas that we are typically looking at. All right, so here's where we're at right now. This is kind of where we're headed in the short term. We've been literally monitoring a little disturbed area of weather in the central, west, southwest, central part of the Atlantic for a couple of days now. And it really has not gotten its act together. There's been a lot of dust from the Sahara. That's been disruptive. But this may be moving far enough away from that zone that it could be into an area that's a little more conducive for development as we get towards the weekend. And so the National Hurricane Center has been very consistent on this for days and days and days now of 60% development over the next 7 days. If it's going to happen, it's more than likely going to happen in the next 3-4 days. I would say if you see something that's going to develop, it's likely going to be over the weekend. So let's take it up full for you. And where is this going? Well, this is headed, we think, west-northwest. So across the Dominican Republic and Haiti today, and there'll be some gusty winds down there, showers and storms, squally weather. But this isn't a tropical system as of just yet. And then perhaps over Cuba, and then up into more than likely the East Gulf of Mexico, or perhaps Florida. Again, keep in mind the Bermuda High is a little bit closer to the coast right now of the U.S., so it's pushing this track a little bit farther south and west, and then it makes the turn. Usually it looks like on this case, or typically it would be up into the Gulf of Mexico. And then we'll have to see what happens with development here. There's a 60% chance, though, that this could become a tropical depression or even a named storm over the course of the weekend. Now, our concern would have to be, well, if this does develop into something in the Gulf of Mexico, say, Saturday, Sunday, where does it go from there? Once this thing comes northward, much like we've seen before, and we talked about this, right, that when you see development down there and they get into the Gulf of Mexico, they're going to have to hit land somehow. And if it comes northward, say into the Florida Panhandle, well, typically that comes up through Georgia and then into the Carolinas. A lot of times you see, news stations will cover all the big storms down at the coast, the Outer Banks, Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, all the way down to Hilton Head, Kiowa. Those storms rarely have direct impacts on the WBTV viewing area. It's more likely the ones that track to the west into the Gulf of Mexico in places like Mobile, Alabama, or Pensacola, Florida. When I see a storm down there and I know it's coming northward, it's likely going to be turning eastward as well. And those are the ones that typically impact us. In fact, you can make an argument that 25% of our annual rainfall comes during the late summer and early fall from decaying tropical systems that come up from the Gulf of Mexico towards our part of the Carolinas. So this would be right on target and right on cue if this was to develop. And there are some long-range models that suggest that we could get some rain out of something along come Tuesday. So that's something we're monitoring. Again, this is so far off, and these things can be so fickle, it's really difficult to pinpoint with any degree of accuracy what you're going to get out of something that's really still in the formulative stages and is literally over the Dominican Republic right now, which, by the way, has higher mountains than North Carolina. The mountains down there are 10,000 feet high, so this is not an area that's conducive for development. It's going to have to get away from land before it can actually really get its act together, if it ever does. So again, that's one thing that we are monitoring, but there's clearly warm water in place, not just up and down the eastern seaboard, but out through the Gulf. Certainly, you've got upper 80s You get into the Caribbean, it's mid to upper 80s. There's some places in the Gulf of Mexico where the water temperature is almost 90 degrees. So there's plenty of warm water. But again, keep in mind that that dust coming off of the Sahara has also been a bit of an issue here of late. And so there are other factors that go into this, and it can be kind of disruptive. You see, this is a sort of a loop here over the next couple of days. See where that dust is coming off of the desert out there, and it literally is just sand out there. And so you get these windstorms, they whip up that dust in mass and then send it westward with the trades. I mean, that's, these trade routes, I mean, that's how Columbus came to America, discovered America, right? They get into those trade winds, and that's what pushes everything westward. And that dust is very much, it's corrosive. It's an irritant to these things. And it gets into these systems, and when it does, it essentially will kind of disrupt the formation of these tropical systems. When you have a Category 5 hurricane, you have a perfect environment. It's at the top of the scale. Anything below that is in a less than perfect environment. And when you either have like an El Nino pattern where you're throwing wind in there that's shearing off the tops of the tropical systems, or you throw dust in there, these are disruptive factors. So it's not just warm water. You also have to have other players lining up if you're going to have an active pattern. And right now, again, we're still dealing with this tropical dust that's coming across Africa into the formation zone. And so this system has been a little bit north of that. And so if it can get away from this and get into the Gulf of Mexico, it is entirely possible that we could get some development out of this. And again, this is right on cue. Typically, June, about 6% of all named storms early in the season. July, typically about 8%. Now, granted, we had some pretty active weather. We've already had 3 named storms this year. So this is, a little bit above average, but that's part of why we are thinking that this is going to be a very much above average year. But as we get into August, September, and early October, it's really when the season kicks in. This is when we start to see the major development come in. And it's really from about August 20th through about the first week of October, where you really just see everything come together. And you line up. Typically, the water's still very warm. You get these systems that are rolling off of Africa, these Cape Verde storms, and everything just lines up. Typically, you start to see that Saharan dust abate and any kind of inhibiting factors. And so this is the time, especially right around Labor Day, right in there, you can literally have 4, 5, 6 named storms in the Atlantic Basin at one time. So this is why I say we're going to get an update from the National Hurricane Center and NOAA on named storms, the forecast, but I'm telling you, I don't think that's going to change very much here. Even though it's been very quiet for the last 3 weeks or so, we've already had 3 named storms, and I'm quite concerned that, again, going forward, if we can get rid of this Saharan dust, which looks like it will abate over time, that we're going to see a very active August and a very active September, and that would be right in line with what normally happens, just about every year. Now, a couple things I want to point out that are separate from the tropics. For today, a lot of kids are going back to school in South Carolina, and every county in the state of South Carolina is under a heat advisory. In our area, we are looking for heat to get up to about 105 this afternoon. Now, the actual temperature will probably stop at about 95 or so. It's not a record. The record's 98, but still, the heat index will be up close to 105 this afternoon, so do keep that in mind. But there will also be some thunderstorms this afternoon, and over the next couple of days, that is going to be a bit of an issue here. Thunderstorm activity coming our way. So there you see your 7-day first alert forecast. 30% chance today, that goes to a 40% chance tomorrow. And some of these storms tomorrow I think could be quite strong during the afternoon and evening hours. One thing is I'm watching the weekend forecast is if we do get a big outbreak of thunderstorms here, say Friday evening, that linger deep into the night, that's going to put a lot of moisture in the air. That's going to bring a lot of low cloudiness here for early on Saturday. And the atmosphere will then have to fight that off. And if that happens, Saturday could be active again with showers and thunderstorms. We may not get to 90 degrees. So today, you look out the window, you see all that sunshine because we didn't have thunderstorms last night. So that's why it's going to heat up more efficiently today. Yesterday we hit 92, but we had to fight the low clouds early in the morning and even fog. Today we don't have to do that. That's why I'm concerned. We're going to about 95 degrees with the heat index going to about 105. I don't think there'll be a ton of thunderstorms this afternoon. There will be a few, but not enough to probably put the kibosh on getting to 97 tomorrow. Now, tomorrow night, I think, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, tomorrow night, the thunderstorm activity is much more widespread, and as a result, there could be a lot more cloud cover here, say early Saturday morning. So Saturday could wind up being in the upper 80s to maybe near 90 with showers and thunderstorms again in the forecast, and then close to 90 here on Sunday. So we're monitoring a couple things here. Alicia Wilson will have an update for you on WBTV News at noon, and she'll be joined by Lisa Villegas later on this afternoon with an update on your forecast. But that's what we're looking at right now. Hope you've enjoyed this first alert, and again, we're focused on the tropics because it's going to be hot and it's going to be heavy here, we think, during the month of August and into September. So we urge you, download our free WBTV weather app and keep it with us here at WBTV, and we will certainly keep you posted. Going to give you one more look at that 7-day forecast, bring it up full for you. 90s. Welcome to the dog days of summer.